Morning Date. Welcome to another edition of Morning Date, a segment where I get to sit and chat with outstanding figures from all fields and all walks of life. And today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Mr. Peter Bartholomew, better known as 파란눈이 한옥지킴이. That's a fun title to have on the business card. He is the vice president of IRC Limited. He is the founder of that company in Seoul. He's an expert in the Korean shipbuilding and construction sectors. He's skilled in Korean trading practices, negotiations, implementations of new ventures, and project supervision. He's fluent in Korean. He's fluent in French. He's fluent in English. And he serves as a permanent arbitrator to the arbitration panel of the Korea Commercial Arbitration Board. Mr. Bartholomew, thank you so much for being a part of Morning Special and being our guest for Morning Date today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here today.
한국어를 한국인보다 더 잘하신다고 들었습니다. 사실이에요?
그럼 절대로 믿지 마세요. Don't believe it.
I heard that you've lived in Korea longer than I have. That's amazing because I've been here for such a long time, but I think you have me beat here. Let's see. I came here originally in the year 2000. How about for you?
1968.
That's just before the year 2000.
Yeah, just a little bit before, yeah.
All right. Well, before we get started, or why don't we use this as an introduction, 우리 청취자 여러분께 인사 한마디 부탁드립니다.
So I came to Korea first in 1968 as a Peace Corps volunteer. Lived in Gangwon-do Jumunjin for 10 months and then for 4 years in Gangneung. And I was involved in education, but not so much with the kids. I was involved in a teacher retraining program, which was sponsored first by the Provincial Education Center and then by the whole country, and Peace Corps shifted to that, and that was my main duty. I also did some community development, building schools for destitute children, a very old program called the Jaegon Kumin Undong, which was started during Syngman Rhee, and that was my Peace Corps life. And then I moved to Seoul, worked with a Korean company for about 8 years, and then I started my own company in 1982, and that's where I am now.
It's an amazing story, your story. We were chatting before we got started today. Your passion for Hanok is, I think it's fair to say, it's unmatched in the country, even by Korean people's standards. Can you tell us about where your passion for this style of architecture came from originally?
Well, frankly speaking, I've had this same passion before I came to Korea. Living in North America, and I studied some in Europe, and everywhere I went, I was fascinated by old architecture, be it very ancient Roman Greek or, the 15th, 16th, 17th, 19th, early 20th century. Because old architecture is made according to that region's, that government's and society's specific cultural aesthetics, art, science, way of living, reflecting social mores and commercial aspects as well. So the building speaks to you when you look at it. Buildings today are just a people box, I call them. And so I had a real passion for it, not just the aesthetics, but also the science of it, as well as the philosophy that's built into it. So when I came to Korea, I just applied the same thing. I was fascinated. In Gangwon-do Gangneung area, it was a very special place from the especially 1500s and then 16, 17, 18, 1900s. A lot of literati went there, scholars went there, royalty went there for either a sabbatical or leave or exile or whatever. And so there were a lot of very beautiful homes, beautiful pleasure pavilions. And fortunately, during that horrible Korean War of 50 to 53, there was very little fighting in Gangneung. So very little destruction. So when I went there, everything was still there. And that was just fantastic. So I learned and studied, and I lived in a very special house. We can talk about that a little later. And I continue it until today. My passion, since I was a kid, was I couldn't bear to see a beautiful work of architecture demolished. It's a piece of art, special to that region. How can you demolish it? And I have the same passion. I'm not the only one. You know, if you go to Europe or America, Canada, or any place, you have what do they call heritage preservation groups all around that are quite fanatic, as I am. So I transferred that same kind of feeling and cultural attitude to Korea, and it's had some effect, but not as much as I want.
So when you moved to Seoul, there was no way, no how you were going to live in an apartment building.
I wouldn't live in an apartment building anywhere, but especially not in Seoul. After that, almost 5 years in that gorgeous place in Gangneung, and so that's the reason I sought out a hanok and moved in 1974 into this house.
And that's the house we're sitting in right now. You've been in this home for 42 years.
That's correct, absolutely.
And I wanted to ask you, is it still in its original kind of state as it was back 42 years ago when you first moved in?
Largely so. The doors and windows that were original, I have just fixed them, repaired them, cleaned them, and maintained them, because that is one of the quintessential cultural values of the building. It's originality, authenticity. And this is something where Koreans generally do not agree. That it's just as well to take out these dirty old doors, throw them on the trash, and make nice new doors that are clean and good looking. But we have a different philosophy.
And now you're in a fight. You're literally in a fight for your home. You and other members of your community here, and we are in the Songbuk-gu area of Seoul, nearby Haewadong. You and your neighbors are fighting to keep your home.
Actually, I think we've won. Not 100% sure, but primarily, yes. The city government had a plan to demolish all houses in this particular neighborhood and build apartment buildings. And I was obviously opposed because I love my house and it's an exceptional place and a great location, and I'll never find another one that I can live in. So I got a group of 20 some odd neighbors together, and we launched a anti-campaign. And to make a long story short, we actually went to court, and we won. And finally we beat them, and I'm very pleased to say that the neighbors who initially were in favor of this realized later that perhaps the terms and conditions of their compensation weren't quite what they expected. So now everybody's pleased with the fact that we've stopped pretty much this demolition plan.
We'll take a break now in our chat with Mr. Peter Bartholomew, and we've got more after Lynyrd Skynyrd's Sweet Home Alabama. Continuing on now with Mr. Peter Bartholomew, who is my guest for this morning's morning date. You see old architecture as art, not only Hanok, but homes from many other parts of the world. But I did want to play devil's advocate just for a moment. If we use a city like Seoul, for example, where do we draw the line? Because this is a very progressive society where it's constantly moving forward. Construction is a constant. I've been here since 2000. You've been here much longer, but I'm sure you've noticed as much as I have. But where do we draw the line? Which buildings do we keep? Which buildings do we tear down to build new modern ones to keep up with the Joneses, if you will? That has to be a challenge, is it not? I'm simply playing devil's advocate here.
It's more than a challenge. Actually, it's not just Korea. In almost all of Asia, the attitude towards buildings is that if it's old, then you should knock it down and build something new on the spot out of concrete, bigger and glass and all that sort of great stuff. In Europe is probably the best example in the world where they have found the balance that we're talking about here, where they have a building, private home all the way up to a 2-3-story building. It could be 100, 300, 400 years old. And they consider that to be a precious, like a jewel of their culture. And that you see it all the time, and it's absolutely critical because the style is unique only to their region and their area and their particular cultural persona. Regrettably in Seoul, and so what do they do with that? They preserve everything that you can see with your eye, interior, exterior, everything that is original, all the original aspects. And then they add the creature comforts. And there are 4 major areas. It's, excuse me, heating, kitchen, bathroom, and the other one is that the wind doesn't come in through the walls and the doors. This is really critical. If you got those three things solved, then you keep the rest of the building. And if you go into these buildings in Germany, in Switzerland, in France, in England, Italy, blah, 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 it's perfect in its originality, but it's cool in the summer, it's heated in the winter, there are bathrooms over in the corner, but they don't stick out at you. They're all kind of concealed very tastefully with a beautiful balance of how do I say, science and construction and aesthetics. But that is considered to be not valuable. But it's changing in Korea now. I really am pleased to say there is a growing fad, can I call it, popularity to live in a hanok. And then the next question comes, fine. So how do you make the hanok comfortable without destroying its originality? It's not difficult. But that is not being done, and that's kind of sad. So even when it is preserved, they gut it totally and put a new interior that doesn't resemble the old one. But at least it's not destroyed.
I asked you when I first came into your beautiful home here, I said, oh, but what do you do in the wintertime? And you said, well, I'm an engineer, so it took me about 4 hours to design something that takes care of that problem. So obviously you have the skills necessary to maintain your home. Can you tell us about the guests that you have staying with you? I find this to be a really interesting story as well.
Yeah, since 1984, I've been a kind of advisor to the Korean Navy Honor Guard in Chinhae. And I go down there and I do counseling and I talk to them about their precision drill performances and exchange ideas on how to improve in that. And I've gotten to know them really well. It's kind of like my Korean family in a way, together with the people from the Sunggyojang Estate in Gangneung. And among those guys, some have a university admission in Seoul, but can't really afford to come to Seoul because they live in the countryside and it's so expensive to live here. So they live in my house, room and board free, in exchange for which they help me to maintain the house and do the chores. And most important, I travel a lot in the country and outside on business. And with any, let's say, single standing family home, you can't just lock the door and go away for a week. It's dangerous to do that. No problem when you have 6 kids that are 6 feet tall plus in the house and fresh off the military base. I have a friend, old lady in the neighborhoods, who says, it's better than having a German Shepherd.
You have the perfect security system here. In 2012, you received the 31st Sejong Munhwasang along with musician Kim Jong-hun and cellist Jung Hana, and prior to that, you were made an honorary citizen of Seoul in 2010. So you're quite the celebrity here in the country now.
Well, I don't know about that, but I was really touched and honored, and also surprised that my efforts on hanok preservation and generally Korean architecture preservation were acknowledged and recognized in that way. It really made me feel good because it made me understand maybe I'm having some impact. Otherwise, they would not be giving me these wonderful awards. I was put on this presidential committee for rejuvenation of Korean culture, and again, I was just astonished that I would be put on that committee, and I take it very seriously, and I'm very honored by it. Yes.
What kind of response do you get when you're talking about, when you as a member of the expat community here, even though you have been here since, almost 50 years now or more, what kind of response do you get when you make reservations or suggestions about the rejuvenation of Korean society? Is it well received?
The only thing that I'm promoting is the preservation of the buildings, and when preserving them, preserve them in their original form. The misunderstanding that I get, and there's no anger with that misunderstanding, please, none at all, is that you can't preserve the building in its original form and have it comfortable. That's a misunderstanding generally in the country. that if you live in a hanok, then there's a litany. Uncomfortable, dirty, cold, expensive to maintain, and outcomes. So the only solution is knock it down to build a new building. And that's kind of in the psyche in Korea, and is partially behind the demolition of the old architecture.
You know, I used to like my house before I visited yours.
Well,
I'll be here for dinner tomorrow at 6.
Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Mr. Peter Bartholomew, thank you so much for taking the time today, sir. It was an absolute treat for myself and for our listeners to hear your story. Again, congratulations to you and the members of your community on your victory about your homes. And we would love to see you again on Morning Special. Thank you so much, sir.
It's been my pleasure indeed. I hope to see you again.